Maria Rodriguez had been working as a housekeeper for the wealthy Patterson family for nearly 3 years. The sprawling Victorian mansion in the hills of Connecticut had become as familiar to her as her own small apartment downtown. Every morning at 7 sharp, she would arrive at the ornate front gates, punch in the security code, and begin her daily routine of maintaining the 15-room estate that housed William Patterson, his wife Eleanor, and their infant son, James. The Pattersons were what people in town called old money. William had inherited the textile fortune from his grandfather, and Eleanor came from a long line of New England aristocrats. They were polite enough to Maria, always saying good morning and thank you. But there was an invisible wall between them that money and social status had built. Maria didn't mind. She had seen enough wealthy families during her 15 years of domestic work to know that respect was earned through consistency and professionalism, not friendship. What Maria loved most about working for the Pattersons was the predictability. Eleanor followed a strict schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she attended charity committee meetings at the country club. Mondays were for her personal trainer, Wednesdays for lunch with her sister Margaret, and Fridays for her standing appointment at the exclusive Bella Vista Spa. William traveled frequently for business, often spending weeks at a time in New York or Boston, leaving Eleanor to manage the household and care for baby James. James was 6 months old, with bright blue eyes like his father and soft blonde curls that reminded Maria of her own son, Diego, when he was that age. Diego was now 22 and working construction in California, too busy with his own life to visit his mother more than twice a year. Sometimes, when Maria was dusting the nursery and heard James babbling happily in his crib, she felt a familiar ache in her chest for the grandchildren she might never have. On this particular Tuesday morning in late October, Maria noticed that Eleanor seemed more frazzled than usual. Her normally perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that even her expensive concealer couldn't hide completely. "Mrs. Patterson, are you feeling all right?" Maria asked as she organized the mail on the marble kitchen counter. Eleanor looked up from where she was preparing a bottle for James. "Oh, I'm fine, Maria. Just tired. James has been fussy lately. The pediatrician says it's probably just a growth spurt, but he's been waking up every few hours crying. William's been in Boston all week, so I've been handling the night feedings alone." Maria nodded sympathetically. She remembered those exhausting early months with Diego, when she was a single mother working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. At least Eleanor had help during the day and could afford a nanny if she wanted one, though she had chosen to care for James herself, something Maria respected. "I have my committee meeting at the club this morning," Eleanor continued, checking her watch. "It's the final planning session for the autumn fundraiser, and I absolutely cannot miss it. James should sleep for at least 2 hours after his bottle. I'll be back by noon at the latest." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Take your time. I'll listen for him while I work upstairs." Eleanor smiled gratefully, grabbed her purse and car keys, and headed for the garage. Maria heard the Mercedes pull out of the driveway and settle into her familiar routine. She started in the master bedroom, changing the Egyptian cotton sheets and organizing Eleanor's extensive jewelry collection. The room was a study in understated elegance, with cream-colored walls, antique furniture, and photographs of the family's various vacations to Europe and the Caribbean. As Maria worked, she listened for sounds from the nursery down the hall, but everything remained quiet. James was indeed sleeping peacefully, just as Eleanor had predicted. Maria moved on to the guest bedrooms, each decorated in a different theme, but all maintaining the same level of luxury that characterized the entire house. She dusted the antique furniture, vacuumed the Persian rugs, and replaced the fresh flowers that Eleanor insisted be changed twice weekly. By 10:30, Maria was working in William's home office, carefully dusting around his collection of first edition books and the numerous awards he had received for his business achievements. The office was William's sanctuary, decorated in rich mahogany and deep green leather. Maria always felt a bit intimidated in this room, surrounded by evidence of a world so different from her own. It was while she was carefully cleaning William's crystal paperweights that she heard it, a sound that made her freeze mid-motion. A baby's cry was echoing through the house, but it wasn't coming from the nursery where James slept. It was coming from somewhere upstairs, from the third floor where Maria rarely had reason to go. The Patterson mansion had 3 full floors. The ground floor contained the main living areas, kitchen, dining room, living room, William's office, and a formal parlor that was used only for entertaining. The second floor housed the master bedroom suite, the nursery, and 3 guest bedrooms. The third floor, according to Eleanor, was mostly used for storage and contained a few spare rooms that had once housed servants when the estate was built in the 1920s. Maria set down her cleaning cloth and listened more carefully. The crying continued, a thin, plaintive wail that tugged at her maternal instincts. But that was impossible. James was the only baby in the house, and he was sleeping soundly in the nursery on the second floor. She had checked on him just 20 minutes earlier, and he had been sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of deep slumber. The sound came again, definitely a baby crying, and definitely from upstairs. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. In all her 3 years working for the Pattersons, she had never heard Eleanor mention anything about the third floor except to say it was used for storage. William had given her a complete tour when she first started working for them, but they had skipped the third floor entirely, with William simply mentioning that it wasn't part of her regular cleaning duties. Maria climbed the main staircase slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. The crying was becoming clearer now, more distinct. It was definitely an infant, and it sounded distressed. But how was that possible? Who else could be in the house? Eleanor had left for her meeting, William was in Boston, and Maria had the only key to the service entrance she used each morning. At the top of the second floor landing, Maria paused at the nursery door and quietly pushed it open. James was still fast asleep in his crib, exactly as she had left him. His breathing was peaceful and regular, and there was no sign that he had been disturbed. She pulled the door closed and continued up to the third floor, following a narrow staircase that was carpeted in deep blue wool. The third floor was dimly lit, with only a few small windows providing natural light. The hallway was lined with closed doors, at least 6 of them, leading to rooms that Maria had never seen. The crying was louder now, coming from behind one of the doors at the far end of the hallway. Maria approached cautiously, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the doorknob. The first door she tried was locked. So was the second. The third door opened to reveal a room filled with covered furniture and cardboard boxes labeled with dates from years past. But the crying wasn't coming from this room. It was coming from further down the hall. Maria continued her search, trying each door systematically. Most were locked, and those that weren't contained only stored household items, old Christmas decorations, out-of-season clothing, and furniture covered in white sheets. But the crying continued, seeming to move from one location to another as if the source was somehow mobile. As she reached the last door at the end of the hallway, Maria noticed that this one was slightly different from the others. While the other doors were painted white to match the hallway walls, this one was made of dark wood and had a more substantial look to it. There was also a small, almost invisible security keypad mounted next to the door frame. The crying was definitely coming from behind this door. Maria tried the handle, but it was locked. She examined the keypad, but had no idea what the code might be. As she stood there, uncertain what to do next, the crying suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was almost more unsettling than the sound had been. Maria pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear any other sounds from within. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, she heard what sounded like footsteps moving around inside the room, soft but distinct. Someone was definitely in there, and they were moving around. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was someone living on the third floor without the Pattersons' knowledge? Was it possible that William and Eleanor were hiding something from her? The idea seemed absurd. They were respected members of the community, active in local charities, and had never given her any reason to suspect them of anything improper. But the evidence was undeniable. There was a baby crying behind a locked door on the third floor of the house, and someone was taking care of that baby. Maria thought about calling Eleanor immediately, but what would she say? That she had heard mysterious crying and found a locked room? Eleanor might think she was losing her mind or trying to cause trouble. Instead, Maria decided to continue her investigation quietly. She returned to the second floor and checked on James again. He was still sleeping peacefully, showing no signs of distress. She then went to the kitchen and looked through the drawers where Eleanor kept various keys and important papers. In a small wooden box in the utility drawer, she found several keys that she had never seen before. Armed with these keys, Maria returned to the third floor. Her heart was pounding as she approached the locked door at the end of the hallway. The first key she tried didn't fit. Neither did the second or third. But the fourth key slipped into the lock smoothly and turned with a quiet click. Maria took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. What she found inside stopped her cold and made her question everything she thought she knew about the family she had been working for. The room was set up as a complete nursery, but it was unlike anything she had ever seen. While James's nursery downstairs was decorated in soft pastels with expensive furniture and toys, this room had a sterile, almost institutional quality to it. The walls were painted stark white, and there was only one small window that had been covered with a heavy curtain, keeping the room in near darkness. In the center of the room stood a metal crib that looked more like a hospital bed than a piece of nursery furniture. Inside the crib, a baby that appeared to be roughly the same age as James was lying on a thin mattress with no sheets or blankets. The infant was wearing a plain white onesie and was staring up at the ceiling with wide, alert eyes that tracked Maria's movement as she entered the room. But what shocked Maria most was not the baby itself, but the striking resemblance this child bore to James. The same bright blue eyes, the same soft blonde curls, even the same delicate features. If she didn't know better, Maria would have sworn she was looking at James himself. The baby began crying again as Maria approached the crib, the same thin, plaintive wail she had heard from downstairs. But, unlike James, who had expensive toys and comfort items in his nursery, this baby had nothing. No toys, no mobile hanging overhead, no soft blankets for comfort. The room was almost cruelly sparse. Maria's hands shook as she reached down and gently picked up the baby. The infant was lighter than James, suggesting he might not be getting adequate nutrition, but he seemed healthy otherwise. As she held him, he stopped crying and looked up at her with curious eyes, as if he had been starving for human contact. Looking around the room more carefully, Maria noticed additional disturbing details. There was a small refrigerator in one corner that contained several bottles of formula, but they appeared to be a generic brand rather than the expensive organic formula that Eleanor used for James. A changing table held a few basic supplies, diapers, wipes, and simple clothing, but nothing more. What disturbed Maria most was the presence of a baby monitor on a small table near the door. The red light indicated it was turned on, meaning someone was listening to what happened in this room. But who? And why was this baby being kept in secret? As these questions swirled through her mind, Maria heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the unmistakable sound of the garage door opening downstairs. Eleanor was home early from her committee meeting, and Maria was standing in a locked room on the third floor holding a baby that she wasn't supposed to know existed. Panic set in as Maria realized her situation. She couldn't simply walk downstairs carrying this baby and pretend she had found him by accident. But she also couldn't leave the infant alone in this sterile, lonely room now that she knew he was there. Every maternal instinct in her body screamed against abandoning this child who so clearly needed care and attention. She could hear Eleanor's heels clicking across the marble floor of the foyer downstairs, followed by the familiar sound of her keys being placed in the crystal bowl on the entry table. In a few minutes, Eleanor would be looking for Maria to see how the morning had gone, and Maria needed to be back in her normal routine, acting as if nothing had happened. Gently, Maria placed the baby back in the metal crib, her heart breaking as he began to cry again. She whispered soothingly to him, promising silently that she would return, that she wouldn't abandon him to this lonely existence. The baby's cries followed her as she slipped out of the room, locked the door behind her, and hurried back down to the second floor. By the time Eleanor called her name, Maria was in the guest bathroom, cleaning the mirror with shaking hands and trying to compose herself. She had to act normal, had to pretend that her world hadn't just been turned upside down by what she had discovered. "Maria? How did everything go this morning?" Eleanor's voice carried up the stairs, pleasant and normal, giving no indication that she was aware of the secret being kept just one floor above them. "Everything went fine, Mrs. Patterson," Maria called back, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "James slept the whole time. I just finished the guest rooms." "Wonderful. I'm going to check on him and then start lunch. Will you be working in the kitchen this afternoon?" "Yes, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be down in just a few minutes." As Eleanor's footsteps moved toward the nursery, Maria leaned against the bathroom wall and tried to catch her breath. Her mind was spinning with questions and implications. Who was the baby upstairs? Why was he being kept secret? Was he Eleanor and William's child? And if so, why was he hidden away while James lived in luxury downstairs? Or was he someone else's child entirely? And, most importantly, what was she supposed to do with this information? Maria thought about her own son Diego and how she had struggled as a single mother to provide for him. She had worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, and sacrificed her own needs to ensure he had everything he required. The idea of a baby being kept in such sparse, lonely conditions while another child in the same house lived in luxury was almost incomprehensible to her. But she also thought about her job and her need for income. At 53 years old, with limited education and no other significant skills, finding another position that paid as well as working for the Pattersons would be nearly impossible. If she confronted them about what she had found, would they simply fire her and continue keeping their secret? Would anyone even believe her if she tried to report what she had seen? As she made her way downstairs to continue her normal routine, Maria's mind was already working on a plan. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what she had seen, and she couldn't abandon that baby to continued isolation and neglect. But she also needed to be careful and smart about how she handled the situation. The afternoon passed in a blur of normal household tasks, but Maria's attention was constantly drawn upward, wondering about the baby on the third floor. Was he crying again? Was someone taking care of him while Eleanor was downstairs with James? The questions multiplied with each passing hour, and Maria found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her work. When Eleanor announced that she was taking James for a walk in his stroller around the estate grounds, Maria saw her opportunity. As soon as she was sure Eleanor was outside, she grabbed the keys and hurried back upstairs. The baby was sleeping when she entered the room, but he woke as soon as he sensed her presence. This time, instead of crying, he looked at her with what seemed like recognition and reached up with tiny hands. Maria spent 20 precious minutes holding and comforting the baby, talking to him softly, and trying to assess his condition more thoroughly. He seemed healthy but underweight, and there was something in his eyes that reminded her of Diego when he was young and craving attention. This baby was hungry for human contact, for the kind of loving interaction that every infant needed to thrive. As she heard Eleanor returning from the walk, Maria spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to get the image of that lonely baby out of her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see those bright blue eyes staring up at her from the metal crib, so full of need and trust. By morning, she had made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. Instead of going directly to the Patterson estate, Maria drove to the local library and spent an hour researching child welfare laws and reporting procedures. She learned that suspected child neglect could be reported to the state's Department of Children and Families. But she also discovered that making a false report could result in serious legal consequences. She needed more information before she could take that step. When she finally arrived at the Patterson mansion that Wednesday morning, Maria noticed that William's car was in the driveway. He had returned from his business trip to Boston earlier than expected. This complicated her plans to investigate further, but it also presented an opportunity to observe how both parents interacted when they were together. Eleanor greeted Maria at the door with her usual polite smile, but Maria detected something different in her demeanor. There was a tension around her eyes, and she seemed more alert than usual, as if she was watching Maria's reactions carefully. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson. I see Mr. Patterson is back from his trip." "Yes, he returned late last night." He's in his office catching up on some paperwork. We'll both be home today, so you can focus on the downstairs areas. No need to go upstairs at all. The instruction was delivered casually, but Maria caught the subtle emphasis on the last sentence. Eleanor had never specifically told her to avoid the upstairs areas before. Was this a coincidence, or did Eleanor somehow suspect that Maria had been exploring beyond her usual duties? Maria spent the morning working in the main living areas, but her attention was constantly divided. She listened for any sounds from upstairs, any indication that someone was caring for the hidden baby. Around mid-morning, she heard William's heavy footsteps on the stairs, but he went directly to the second floor, presumably to check on James or speak with Eleanor. During her lunch break, Maria sat in the kitchen and tried to piece together what she knew. The baby upstairs looked remarkably similar to James, suggesting they were related. If William and Eleanor were both his parents, why was one child living in luxury while the other was hidden away? The most obvious explanation was that the hidden baby had some kind of disability or condition that the parents were ashamed of, but from what Maria had observed, the child seemed perfectly healthy. Another possibility was that one of the babies wasn't actually William and Eleanor's biological child. Perhaps they had struggled with fertility issues and had arranged for a surrogate mother, but something had gone wrong. Or perhaps Eleanor had given birth to twins, and they had chosen to keep only one for reasons Maria couldn't fathom. The more she thought about it, the more disturbed Maria became. Regardless of the circumstances, no baby deserved to be isolated and hidden away. Every child had the right to love, attention, and proper care. The image of that sterile room with its single occupant haunted her as she returned to her cleaning duties. Late in the afternoon, as Maria was dusting the living room, she overheard a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. William was in his office with the door slightly ajar, and his voice carried into the hallway where Maria was working. "Yes, I understand the timeline," he was saying. "But we need to be absolutely certain before we move forward. Any mistake at this point could be catastrophic for everyone involved." There was a long pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. "No, Eleanor doesn't know about this conversation. She's already stressed enough about the situation. I'm handling this myself. Yes, I have the documentation ready. The lawyer says everything should be finalized within the week." Maria's hands trembled as she continued dusting, straining to hear more of the conversation. Legal documentation? A timeline for something? Was William planning to do something with the baby upstairs? "I know it's not ideal," William continued, "but we can't keep this arrangement indefinitely. The risks are too great, and we have James to consider. We have to think about what's best for our family." The conversation ended abruptly, and Maria heard William's chair creak as he leaned back. She quickly moved away from the office area, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just heard. It sounded like William was planning to resolve the situation with the hidden baby, but what did that mean? Were they planning to give the child away? Or something worse? That evening, as Maria prepared to leave, she made a decision that would require all of her courage. She waited until she saw Eleanor take James upstairs for his evening routine, then approached William in his office. "Mr. Patterson, may I speak with you for a moment?" William looked up from his computer with surprise. In 3 years of working for the family, Maria had rarely initiated conversations with him beyond basic greetings and work-related questions. "Of course, Maria. What's on your mind?" Maria took a deep breath and chose her words carefully. "I was wondering about the third floor of the house. I've been working here for 3 years, but I've never been up there. I was thinking that maybe I should include it in my regular cleaning routine, especially the rooms that might be storing family heirlooms or important items." William's expression didn't change, but Maria noticed his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. "That's very thoughtful of you, Maria, but it's not necessary. The third floor is mostly empty storage space, nothing that requires regular attention. We prefer to keep those areas undisturbed." "Of course, Mr. Patterson. I just wanted to make sure I was taking care of everything you needed. You're doing excellent work exactly as you are. There's no need to expand your duties." The dismissal was polite, but firm. As Maria left the office, she was more certain than ever that the Pattersons were deliberately hiding something on the third floor. William's reaction to her innocent question had been too quick, too defensive for someone who had nothing to conceal. That night, Maria called her son Diego in California. She needed to talk to someone she trusted, even if she couldn't tell him the complete truth about what she had discovered. "Mijo, I need to ask you something," she said after they had exchanged pleasantries. "If you knew that a child was being treated badly, but speaking up might cost you your job and create problems for everyone involved, what would you do?" Diego was quiet for a moment. "Mom, that's a heavy question. Are you talking about something specific?" "Just hypothetically, son. I've been thinking about moral responsibilities lately." "Well, I'd say that a child's welfare has to come first, no matter what. Adults can take care of themselves, but kids depend on us to protect them. If someone's hurting a child, and you do nothing, you become part of the problem." Diego's words confirmed what Maria already knew in her heart. She thanked him and hung up, more resolved than ever to find a way to help the baby on the third floor. The next morning, Maria arrived at work with a plan. She had stopped at a drugstore and purchased a small digital camera, which she concealed in her cleaning supply bag. If she was going to report the situation to authorities, she needed evidence. Her word alone might not be enough, especially against a wealthy and respected family like the Pattersons. Eleanor had left early for her weekly spa appointment, and William was back in Boston for a business meeting that was expected to last all day. This gave Maria the opportunity she needed to conduct a thorough investigation of the third floor. She made her way upstairs with her cleaning supplies, including the hidden camera. The baby was awake when she entered the room, and he seemed to recognize her, reaching up with tiny hands and making soft cooing sounds. Maria's heart melted as she picked him up and held him close. "I'm going to help you, little one," she whispered. "I promise I'm going to find a way to get you out of here." As she comforted the baby, Maria took careful photos of the room with her camera. She documented the sterile conditions, the lack of toys or comfort items, and the institutional appearance of the furniture. She also took pictures of the baby himself, focusing on his face to show his remarkable resemblance to James. While she was photographing the room, Maria made another disturbing discovery. In a small closet, she found medical records and documentation that revealed the shocking truth about the baby's identity. According to the papers, both babies had been born on the same day at the same hospital. They were indeed twins, both biological children of William and Eleanor Patterson. But the documentation revealed something even more troubling. Medical tests had been conducted on both babies shortly after birth, and the results showed that while James was completely healthy, his twin brother, whose name was listed as Michael, had tested positive for a genetic condition that could lead to developmental delays and other health challenges later in life. The papers included correspondence with several adoption agencies and legal documents that outlined procedures for voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. William and Eleanor were planning to give Michael away, to separate the twins permanently, and pretend that Michael had never existed. Maria sat on the floor of the closet, holding the medical records with shaking hands. The full scope of the Pattersons' deception was now clear. They had given birth to twins, but when they learned that one child might have special needs, they had decided to keep only the perfect baby. Michael was being hidden away until arrangements could be made to transfer him to another family, probably one that had no idea of his true parentage. The cruelty of the situation took Maria's breath away. These parents were treating their own child like a defective product to be returned, denying him the love and care he deserved simply because he might require extra attention and support as he grew up. Meanwhile, James was receiving all the advantages that money could provide, oblivious to the fact that his twin brother was living in isolation just one floor above him. As Maria held Michael and looked through the documents, she realized that time was running out. According to the legal papers, the adoption arrangements were scheduled to be finalized within the next few days. Once Michael was transferred to another family, it would be almost impossible to reunite the twins or expose the truth about what the Pattersons had done. Maria took photos of the most important documents, making sure to capture the baby's names, birth dates, and medical information. She also photographed the correspondence with adoption agencies and the legal papers outlining the relinquishment process. This evidence would be crucial if she decided to involve authorities. As she was preparing to leave the room, Maria heard something that made her freeze. The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway indicated that someone had returned home unexpectedly. She quickly gathered the documents, placed Michael back in his crib, and listened carefully to identify who had arrived. Eleanor's voice carried up from the foyer, but she wasn't alone. Maria could hear another woman's voice, one she didn't recognize. They were coming up the main staircase, and their footsteps were heading toward the second floor. Maria slipped out of Michael's room and locked the door behind her, then hurried down the narrow staircase to the second floor. She could hear Eleanor and her companion in the nursery with James, cooing over him and discussing his development. "He's absolutely perfect, Eleanor," the unknown woman was saying. "William must be so proud. And you're so lucky to have been blessed with such a healthy, beautiful baby." "Yes, we feel very fortunate," Eleanor replied. But Maria detected a strain in her voice. "James is everything we could have hoped for." Maria made her way downstairs and busied herself with cleaning the kitchen, but she couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor's words. James is everything we could have hoped for. The implication was clear. Michael was not everything they had hoped for, and so he didn't deserve their love or acknowledgement. The visiting woman turned out to be Eleanor's sister Margaret, who stayed for lunch and spent considerable time playing with James in the living room. Maria watched them interact and noticed how naturally James responded to attention and stimulation. Upstairs, Michael was alone in his sterile room with no toys, no interaction, and no opportunity to develop the social skills that babies needed. As Margaret prepared to leave, Maria overheard part of their conversation that confirmed her worst fears. "Have you told Margaret about the arrangements for next week?" Eleanor asked William, who had returned from Boston during lunch. "Everything is handled," William replied quietly. "The family is very excited about the adoption. They've been trying to have a child for years, and they see this as an answer to their prayers. It's for the best," Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We can't provide the specialized care he might need, and James deserves our full attention." Margaret's voice was puzzled. "What are you talking about? What adoption?" There was an uncomfortable silence before William spoke again. "It's a private family matter, Margaret. Nothing you need to concern yourself with." Margaret didn't press the issue, but Maria could sense her confusion as she said goodbye and left the house. It was clear that Eleanor's own sister didn't know about Michael's existence, which meant the Pattersons had been keeping their secret from everyone in their social circle. That afternoon, as Maria continued her work, she wrestled with the decision of how to proceed. She had the evidence she needed to expose the situation, but she also understood the potential consequences. If she went to authorities with her story, it would destroy the Patterson family and likely result in both babies being placed in foster care while the situation was investigated. But if she did nothing, Michael would be given away to strangers who might never know the truth about his background. He would grow up believing that his adoptive parents were his only family, never knowing that he had a twin brother living just a few miles away. The injustice of the situation was overwhelming. As she was organizing the mail on the kitchen counter, Maria discovered another piece of the puzzle. Among the letters was correspondence from a law firm specializing in adoption services. The letter contained a schedule for the final transfer of custody, set for the following Monday. Michael would be taken from the house in just 4 days. Maria realized that this was her last chance to act. Once Michael was gone, exposing the truth would be much more complicated and traumatic for everyone involved, especially the innocent adoptive family who would be deceived about their new child's origins. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave the Patterson estate, she looked up at the third floor one more time. Behind that small window, Michael was spending another night alone, unaware that his entire future was being decided by adults who saw him as a burden rather than a blessing. The weekend passed in a blur of careful planning and moral preparation. Maria spent hours researching child welfare laws, adoption procedures, and the rights of biological parents. She learned that what the Pattersons were doing might not technically be illegal if they followed proper adoption protocols, but the deception involved and the conditions under which Michael was being kept certainly raised serious ethical and legal questions. On Saturday morning, Maria visited her priest at St. Teresa's Catholic Church, where she had been a member for over 15 years. Father Miguel had known her since Diego was a teenager and had always been someone she could turn to for guidance during difficult times. "Father, I need to talk to you about a moral dilemma," Maria said as they sat in the quiet sanctuary after morning mass. "Of course, my child. What's troubling you?" Maria chose her words carefully, not wanting to reveal specific details that might compromise her position. If you knew that a child was being treated unfairly by his own parents, but speaking up would cause a lot of pain for everyone involved, what would be the right thing to do? Father Miguel studied her face with concern. "Maria, this sounds like more than a hypothetical question. Are you witnessing something that concerns you?" "I can't give you details, Father, but I need to know what my obligations are as a Christian and as a human being." The elderly priest was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the gentle authority that came from decades of pastoral counseling. "Our Lord Jesus said that whatever we do to the least among us, we do to him. Children are the most vulnerable members of our society, and we have a sacred duty to protect them from harm. If a child is being neglected or mistreated, staying silent makes us complicit in their suffering. But what if speaking up destroys a family? What if it causes more harm than good? Maria, sometimes the truth is painful, but it's still the truth. And sometimes families that appear intact on the surface are already broken inside. A child's welfare must always come before adult convenience or reputation." Father Miguel's words confirmed what Maria already knew in her heart, but they also strengthened her resolve. As she left the church that morning, she felt a sense of peace about the decision she had to make. On Sunday, Maria drove past the Patterson estate and saw that both William and Eleanor were home. Their cars were in the driveway, and she could see lights on throughout the house. She wondered if they were spending time with both of their children, or if Michael was still alone on the third floor while they enjoyed a family day with James downstairs. That evening, Maria called the state's child welfare hotline and spoke with a caseworker named Jennifer Walsh. She explained that she had information about a child who might be at risk, but she requested a meeting in person rather than providing details over the phone. "Mrs. Rodriguez, can you tell me if the child is in immediate physical danger?" Jennifer asked. "I don't believe he's being physically harmed, but he's being neglected emotionally and socially. And there are plans to remove him from his current situation very soon. We can meet first thing Monday morning at our office downtown. Please bring any documentation or evidence you have to support your concerns." Monday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Maria's mood as she prepared for what would likely be the most difficult day of her life. She had called in sick to work, telling Eleanor that she had food poisoning and wouldn't be able to come in. This gave her the time she needed to meet with the caseworker, while also ensuring that she would know exactly when the adoption transfer was supposed to take place. Jennifer Walsh turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened carefully as Maria explained the situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never interrupting the flow of the story. When Maria finished, Jennifer reviewed the photographs and documents that Maria had gathered. "This is very serious, Mrs. Rodriguez," Jennifer said finally. "If your allegations are accurate, this represents both child neglect and fraud in adoption proceedings. The adoptive family has the right to know the complete medical and family history of the child they're taking in." "What happens now?" Maria asked. "We need to investigate immediately. I'm going to contact the police and request that they accompany me to the Patterson residence this afternoon. We'll need to interview both parents, examine the living conditions you've described, and ensure both children receive immediate medical evaluations." "Will the babies be taken away from their parents?" "That depends on what we find during our investigation. If the children are not in immediate danger, we may allow them to remain in the home while we complete our assessment. But given the allegations you've raised, we'll certainly be requiring significant changes in their care arrangements." Jennifer explained that Maria might be required to testify if the case went to court, and that there could be legal consequences for the Pattersons depending on what the investigation revealed. She also warned Maria that her employment with the family would almost certainly be terminated once her role in exposing the situation became known. "I understand," Maria said. "I've been working for them for 3 years, and I need this job. But I can't continue pretending I don't know about that baby upstairs. You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Rodriguez. It takes courage to speak up for someone who can't speak for themselves. That afternoon, as Jennifer Walsh and two police officers approached the Patterson mansion, Maria waited at home by her phone. She had given Jennifer her contact information and asked to be updated on the situation as it developed. The waiting was almost unbearable. At 4:30, her phone rang. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Walsh. We've completed our initial investigation, and I wanted to update you on what we found. Were you able to find Michael? Is he okay? Yes, we found the child exactly where you said he would be. The conditions were consistent with your description, and the baby appears to be healthy but underweight. We also discovered the documentation you mentioned, confirming that both children are biological twins born to William and Eleanor Patterson. Maria felt a surge of relief mixed with sadness. What about the parents? How did they react? Mr. Patterson was not at home when we arrived, but Mrs. Patterson initially denied that there was a second child in the house. When we showed her our search warrant and explained that we had reliable information about the situation, she became very emotional and eventually led us to the third floor. Jennifer explained that Eleanor had broken down completely when confronted with the evidence. She had confessed that she and William had been overwhelmed when they learned that one of their twins might have special needs, and that William had convinced her that giving Michael up for adoption was the best solution for everyone involved. She kept saying that she thought they were doing the right thing. Jennifer continued that Michael would be better off with a family who could give him the specialized care he might need. But it was clear that she was having second thoughts about the decision. What about the adoptive family? Were they told the truth about Michael's background? That's one of the most troubling aspects of this case. The adoption agency was told that the birth mother was an unmarried teenager who couldn't care for the child. They had no idea that Michael had living biological parents who were keeping his twin brother. The adoptive family has been completely deceived. Jennifer explained that the adoption proceedings had been immediately halted pending a full investigation. Both babies were currently in protective custody at the local hospital, where they were receiving medical evaluations and being cared for by trained pediatric staff. Will the babies be returned to their parents? Maria asked. That decision will depend on the results of our investigation and the recommendations of family court. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson will have the opportunity to demonstrate that they can provide appropriate care for both children, but they'll need to undergo counseling and parenting classes. They'll also face possible criminal charges related to fraud in adoption proceedings. The conversation ended with Jennifer thanking Maria again for her courage in reporting the situation. As Maria hung up the phone, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Michael was finally safe and receiving proper care, sadness for the family that was now being torn apart, and anxiety about her own uncertain future. The next morning, the story broke in the local newspaper. Prominent local family investigated for child neglect read the headline, followed by an article that provided basic details about the discovery of hidden twins and the halted adoption proceedings. While the article didn't mention Maria by name, it was clear that someone with inside knowledge had exposed the situation. Maria's phone rang constantly throughout the day as reporters tried to reach her for comment, but she refused all interviews. She had done what she felt was right, but she had no desire to profit from the Patterson family's pain or to become a public figure in the scandal. On Wednesday, Jennifer Walsh called with an update on the case. The medical evaluations are complete, she reported. Both babies are healthy, though Michael was indeed underweight and showing some signs of developmental delay due to lack of stimulation. The genetic condition identified at birth is relatively minor and very manageable with proper support. Are they back with their parents? James has been returned to Mr. and Mrs. Patterson's care with court-ordered supervision and mandatory family counseling. Michael is still in foster care while we determined the best placement for him. This news troubled Maria deeply. Why are they being separated? They're brothers. They should be together. The court is concerned about the parents' ability to care for both children appropriately, given their previous behavior. There's also the question of whether the family can overcome the damage that's been done to their relationship. Jennifer explained that William Patterson was facing possible criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy related to the illegal adoption arrangements. Eleanor was cooperating fully with investigators and had expressed remorse for her role in the deception, but the trust between the parents had been severely damaged. Mrs. Patterson has admitted that she never wanted to give Michael away, Jennifer continued. She says her husband convinced her that it was necessary, and she went along with the plan because she was exhausted and overwhelmed. But she's been asking about Michael constantly and wants to see him. Over the following weeks, Maria followed the case through newspaper reports and occasional updates from Jennifer Walsh. The story had attracted national attention as an example of how genetic testing and societal pressure could lead parents to make devastating choices about their children's futures. Eleanor Patterson had filed for separation from William and was fighting for custody of both children. She had completed parenting classes and family counseling and was demonstrating her commitment to caring for both boys regardless of any special needs they might have. William Patterson's legal troubles were mounting. In addition to charges related to fraudulent adoption proceedings, investigators had discovered that he had used his business connections to facilitate the illegal placement and had attempted to bribe officials to expedite the process. His reputation in the business community was destroyed, and his textile company was facing boycotts from ethical investors. The adoptive family who had been deceived in the process was also pursuing legal action against both William Patterson and the adoption agency that had facilitated the fraud. They had been emotionally devastated to learn that the child they had planned to adopt was actually one of twins whose biological parents were alive and able to care for him. 2 months after Maria's initial report to authorities, she received a phone call that brought the story full circle. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Eleanor Patterson. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to thank you for what you did." Maria was surprised by the call and wasn't sure how to respond. "Mrs. Patterson, please, let me say this. I know you lost your job because of me, and I know this whole situation has been difficult for you. But you saved my son's life. You saved both of my boys." Eleanor went on to explain that the court had granted her custody of both James and Michael, and that the family was in intensive therapy to heal from the trauma of the separation. Michael was thriving with proper care and attention, and his development was progressing normally despite the genetic marker that had initially frightened his parents. "He's such a happy baby," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe we almost gave him away. Every day I look at him and James playing together, and I realize what we would have lost forever." "What about your husband?" Maria asked. "William and I are divorced. He's facing prison time, and honestly, I don't think I could ever trust him again after what he convinced me to do. But the boys and I are going to be fine. We're learning to be a real family." Eleanor also told Maria that she had established a college fund for Michael to help with any special educational needs he might have in the future, and that she had begun volunteering with organizations that supported families dealing with genetic conditions in their children. "I want to make sure no other family goes through what we did," she said. "Fear and ignorance almost cost us everything." Before ending the call, Eleanor made an unexpected offer. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I know you need work, and I know this whole situation has made it difficult for you to find another position. Would you consider coming back to work for us? Not as just a housekeeper, but as a childcare assistant to help me take care of both boys." Maria was touched by the offer but declined politely. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Patterson, but I think it's better for everyone if I find work elsewhere. You and your boys need to build your relationship without reminders of this difficult time. I understand, but if you ever change your mind, or if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me." After hanging up the phone, Maria reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. She had indeed lost her job at the Patterson estate, and finding new employment had been challenging due to the publicity surrounding the case. But she had eventually found work with another family, one that appreciated her honesty and integrity. More importantly, she had helped reunite a family that had been torn apart by fear and prejudice. Michael and James would grow up together as brothers should, supporting each other through whatever challenges life might bring. The genetic condition that had initially terrified their parents would become just one aspect of Michael's identity, not a defining limitation. On a sunny afternoon in late spring, nearly 6 months after she had first heard that baby crying upstairs, Maria was walking through the downtown area when she encountered Eleanor Patterson pushing a double stroller. Both babies were alert and happy, reaching for each other's hands and babbling contentedly as they took in the sights around them. Eleanor saw Maria and immediately approached her with a genuine smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how wonderful to see you. Boys, this is the lady who helped make sure you could stay together." Maria looked down at the two babies, so similar in appearance, but each with his own distinct personality already emerging. James was examining a colorful toy with serious concentration, while Michael was more interested in watching the people walking by, his bright eyes taking in everything around him with curiosity and joy. "They're beautiful," Maria said, feeling tears prick her eyes. "They look so happy and healthy." "They are," Eleanor replied. Michael's latest evaluation showed that he's meeting all his developmental milestones. The doctor says that whatever delays he experienced during those early months have been completely overcome with proper stimulation and care. As Maria watched the two brothers interact with each other, she thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A baby's cry echoing through an empty house had started it all, but it had taken human compassion and moral courage to ensure that the cry was ultimately answered with love rather than abandonment. The experience had taught Maria that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important outcomes. She had risked her livelihood and her security to speak up for a child who couldn't speak for himself, and, in doing so, she had helped preserve a family that might otherwise have been broken forever. That evening, Maria called her son Diego in California and told him the complete story for the first time. She had kept the details private during the investigation, but now that everything was resolved, she felt ready to share what had happened. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," Diego said when she finished. "You did exactly what you should have done. That baby needed someone to be his voice, and you stepped up when it mattered. I was scared, Mijo. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. But you did it anyway, because you knew it was right even when it was hard. That's what real courage looks like." As Maria prepared for bed that night, she thought about the unexpected ways that life can test us. She had started that Tuesday morning 3 years earlier expecting nothing more challenging than dusting furniture and organizing mail. Instead, she had been confronted with a moral dilemma that forced her to choose between personal security and doing what was right for an innocent child. The baby's cry that had echoed through the Patterson mansion had been more than just a sound. It had been a call to action, a reminder that every human being has a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Maria had answered that call, and while the journey had been difficult and uncertain, the outcome had validated her faith in the power of truth and compassion. Years from now, when James and Michael Patterson were grown men, they would understand how close they had come to being separated forever by fear and prejudice. They would know that their brotherhood had been preserved by the courage of a woman who refused to look the other way when she witnessed injustice. And Maria would always remember the lesson she had learned during those difficult months, that sometimes the most important thing you can do in life is listen carefully when someone needs your help, and then find the courage to act on what you hear, no matter what it might cost you. The echo of that baby's cry had changed everything, and, in the end, it had led not to tragedy but to healing, not to separation but to the restoration of a family that had almost been lost forever. Maria drove home with her mind made up. She would spend the weekend gathering additional information and preparing her approach to authorities. She couldn't save Michael by Monday, but she could ensure that the truth came to light, and that both babies ultimately received the love and care they deserved. The comfortable routine of her job was permanently shattered, but Maria felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced in years. Sometimes doing the right thing required risking everything you had worked for, and this was one of those times. Michael's innocent eyes had seen through her and touched something deep in her soul, and she would not abandon him to a future built on lies and rejection. As she lay in bed that night, Maria thought about her own son Diego and the struggles they had faced together when he was young. She had never given up on him, even when times were difficult and resources were scarce. Every child deserved that kind of unconditional love and commitment, regardless of their challenges or imperfections. The weekend ahead would bring difficult decisions and life-changing actions, but Maria had never been more certain that she was doing the right thing. Michael's cry had echoed through the house and straight into her heart, and she would not rest until that cry was answered with the love and justice he deserved. Aunt Lee placed the baby back in his crib and returned to her duties downstairs. But her mind was made up. She couldn't continue working in this house and pretending she didn't know about the child on the third floor. She had to find a way to help him, even if it meant risking everything she had worked for. That evening, as Maria prepared to leave for the day, she looked up at the third-floor windows from the circular driveway. One small window showed the faintest glimmer of light, and she knew that behind that window was a baby who was spending another night alone in that sterile room. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her shoulders as she drove home to her small apartment, already planning what she would do next. The discovery had changed everything, and Maria knew that tomorrow would bring decisions that would affect not only her own future, but the life of an innocent child who had no voice to speak for himself. As she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she could still hear the echo of that baby's cry, and she knew that the sound would haunt her until she found a way to help him. The comfortable predictability of her job at the Patterson estate was gone forever, replaced by a moral dilemma that would test everything she believed about right and wrong, loyalty and justice, and the responsibility that comes with knowledge of someone else's secret.